Where is this guy?
Hello, James. It's time for you to review another era. Are you ready to delve deeper into the miserable history of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Oh, well, look who it is. Yeah, guess what? I was already ready to go, okay? Yeah, you weren't waiting for me. I was waiting for you, so yeah, give it to me, man. What era am I reviewing today, huh?
Today, James, you are going to be reviewing the Sam Wyche era.
Sam Wyche era? I mean, yeah, I guess I can do that. That one's pretty sad. Jeez. All right. Yeah, fine. I'll do it. Let's go.
Very good, James. As always, I will be keeping an eye on your progress as you delve deeper into the terrible history that is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Until then, farewell.
All right, well, I better go do some research then. Hey guys, what's going on? James here, and in this video today, we're going to be reviewing the Sam Wyche era, which lasted from 1992 to 1995, before the greatness of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that went into the late 90s and early 2000s. We had one more era from the ownership of Hugh Culverhouse before Malcolm Glazier bought the team, and this was the Sam Wyche era. So, who is Sam Wyche? Well, he was actually a former NFL quarterback who played from 1968 to 1976. He was undrafted, so kudos to him for actually, making a bit of a career for himself in the league by being a backup. So, 3 years after playing, he would join the 49ers as an assistant coach and actually win a Super Bowl in 1981 as an assistant coach. So Sam Wyche was a Super Bowl champion, which is pretty cool in my opinion. But he would then go on to be the head coach at Indiana for 1 year. He did not do good. He had a 3-8 record before he became the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, where he really, gained his fame, so to speak. He spent 8 years as the Bengals head coach from 1984 all the way to 1991 and took the team to the playoffs twice, finishing with an overall record of 61 wins to 66 losses. Not great, but it is hard to win in the NFL as a head coach, and he was pretty close to 500 ball, and, that's not bad in my opinion. However, he did go 3-13 in his final season with the Bengals. Now, whereas Ray Perkins was a strict head coach, definitely was, grinding his players into the dust and really just an overall strict, very just not fun guy in certain situations, Sam Wyche was actually seen as a down-to-earth type of players coach. And he was a, very fun-loving, very enjoyable guy. He could take a joke, whereas Ray Perkins was just kind of a scary dude. But the big thing for Sam Wyche, going from the Cincinnati Bengals, going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, was that he was known for his high scoring and innovative offenses in Cincinnati. So how would he do in Tampa Bay? Well, let's talk about it. Let's take a look at year number 1 of the Sam Wyche era, 1992. The final record was 5-11. Not a great start, but, it was his first year coaching for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Yeah, he took a little bit of time off, going from Cincinnati to Indiana, then back to the NFL. So, maybe you could give him a break in year number 1. Fun fact, this was actually Vinny Testaverde's final season in Tampa Bay. Now, in terms of points for, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had 267, and in terms of points against, they had 365 for a difference of -98, which is not good considering Sam Wyche was supposed to be known for his innovative, high-scoring offenses. But again, it's his first year, so, we'll go ahead and give him a little bit of slack. And by the way, by God, that's Steve DeBerg's music, baby. He is back. Steve DeBerg came back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after some time away towards the end of the Ray Perkins era. He was going to be the veteran backup behind Vinny Testaverde for this season. Now, while basically it was the same roster from the previous season, the last year of the Ray Perkins Americans era, the special teams unit was literally, and I mean that in the most literal way possible, one of the worst units in NFL history. They had a field goal percentage of 54.5%. I didn't even think you could get a field goal percentage that bad. Now, it would get slightly, and I really emphasize the word slightly here, better in, the coming years, but 54.5% field goal percentage. Could you imagine if that happened in today's NFL? I think that might actually be legitimately impossible, because teams would just go and get rid of basically any kicker that would just not do good. You'd have to cycle through like 8 kickers, but I think you would eventually find one. So the fact that this happened for an entire year is just mind-boggling. But I do want to say some of the players that were drafted in this 1992 season were Courtney Hawkins in round number 2, Mark Wheeler in round number 3, Craig Erickson in round number 4, don't worry, we'll get back to him, and Santana Dodson in round number 5. All of these guys had some level of impact for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the next couple of years, so overall it was good just to see them. Now, I do want to say, before the season started, Sam Wyche came out and said before the season that he could fix Vinny Testaverde and make him into a great player. He was wrong. Some of the notable players from this season in terms of statistics and numbers include Vinny Testaverde himself. He started 14 games, had 14 touchdowns to 16 interceptions. Yeah, this sounds pretty familiar. However, there were some positives. Reggie Cobb had 1,171 rushing yards, which was the 7th most in the NFL that year, by the way, and 9 rushing touchdowns. Overall, great year for the running back. Lawrence Dawsey had 776 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown. Mark Carrier had 692 receiving yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. And then on the defensive side of the football, Santana Dodson, the Bucs' 5th round draft pick, had 10 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumbles recovered, and 1 touchdown. That's a pretty darn good rookie year, in my opinion. Broderick Thomas was continuing to do Broderick Thomas things. He had 5 sacks, 2 interceptions, 1 touchdown, 1 forced fumble, 3 fumbles recovered, and then finally 113 tackles. He really was a beast for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the late 80s and early 90s. Mark Wheeler, the Bucs' 3rd round draft pick, and Keith McCants and Ray Seals, all 3 of those guys had 5 sacks each, and then one of them had 1 fumble recovered. I believe it was Ray Seals, don't quote me on that. Finally, in the secondary, Marty Carter, who was the strong safety for the team, had 3 interceptions, 2 sacks, and 118 tackles, and Milton Mack, a cornerback, and Darrell Fullington, the free safety, both had 3 interceptions each. So overall, not bad from the defense. They were doing what they needed to do. And even the running game was good as well. But in the passing game, that's where it was not looking good. The leading receiver, right, had 776 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown. Then Mark Carrier, who was the 2nd best receiver on the team that year, had 692 receiving yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. Not good numbers for a guy who was brought in to, cultivate and create innovative and high-scoring offenses, but at least the run game was good. Like, there were positives to take away from year number 1 of the Sam Wyche era. Just needed to work on that passing game a little bit. Moving on to year number 2, 1993, the final record was 5-11, and the Buccaneers would finish in the bottom half of the league in both offense and defense. Okay, their points for were 237, their points against 376, for a difference of negative 139. That is not good. Again, you want to see more scoring from the offense, but as I said in the last year, this was Vinny Testaverde. He is gone. He's completely gone now, and Steve DeBerg was back as the veteran backup. I love Steve DeBerg. It's been awesome to go ahead and track his career with Tampa Bay, but it was now time for the Craig Erickson show, baby. I told you we'd get back to Craig Erickson. The special teams was improved to a 72.7 field goal percentage, which again would get you laughed out of the building in today's NFL. Like, that's what Roberto Aguayo was doing, and he was done after that year. So Yeah, still not great numbers, but they also brought in this guy who played in Pittsburgh. His name was Hardy Nickerson. We'll get back to him in a little bit, but looking at the draft, it included Eric Curry, who was the number 6 overall pick in the draft, John Lynch, who was the 3rd round draft pick in the 1993 NFL draft, Horace Copeland, who was the 4th round draft pick in the 1993 NFL draft, and then Chidi Ahanatu, who was the 6th rounder in the 1993 NFL draft. So overall, they got Eric Curry, who was a good pass rusher. They got Horace Copeland, who would do some good things in the receiving game for them. And then, this John Lynch guy, geez, like, who cares about him, am I right? Looking at some of the notable stats of some of the guys who were, impactful for this team during that season, Craig Erickson, he did start 15 games for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers during this year, and he had 18 touchdowns to 21 interceptions. I'm getting some real Vinny Testaverde vibes here. However, Reggie Cobb, playing in only 12 games, did finish with 658 rushing yards and 4 total touchdowns, but you could chalk that up to injuries. Like, I'm not going to knock Reggie Cobb for that too much. Courtney Hawkins had 933 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. Horace Copeland had 633 receiving yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. On the defensive side of the football, Ray Seals had 8.5 sacks, 1 interception, 1 fumble recovered, and 1 touchdown. Santana Dodson had 5 sacks and 3 forced fumbles. Eric Curry had 5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and 1 fumble recovered. Joe King, the free safety, had 3 interceptions, 1 forced fumble, and 2 fumbles recovered. And then finally, the cream of the crop in terms of the defensive play, Hardy Nickerson is an absolute beast of a human being. He was a first-team All-Pro. He made the Pro Bowl, 214 tackles. Good Lord. 1 interception, 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovered, and 1 sack. And John Lynch only started 4 games in his rookie year. All right, well, hey, there were still a couple of good starting safeties on the team. Basically, the starters from the previous season who did pretty darn good were still here. So I guess it makes sense that John Lynch wouldn't play a lot in his rookie year. He is a Hall of Famer, by the way. I just want to point that out. But, yeah, kind of a weird thing to think of. He only started 4 games in his rookie season and basically didn't play at all. He finished this year with 13 tackles. So, yeah, that's kind of weird. Moving on to year number 3, in 1994, the final record was 6-10. Now, this was an improvement from the 2-5-11 years to start off the Sam Wyche era, and they did finish the year winning 4 out of their last 5 games. So, yeah, things were on the uptick a little bit. However, on a more serious note, this year would mark the passing of the original owner of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Hugh Culverhouse, who passed away at the age of 75. This season would actually prove to be one of just literal chaos, as many people believed that the team would move. Nobody knew what was going to happen with that. There was rumors of them moving to Cleveland, and all these other different types of things. The team was put up for sale. 3 trustees were in place after the passing of Hugh Culverhouse, and the interim owners, those 3 gentlemen, told Sam Wyche that he was stripped of his personnel decision-making powers and they would be given to Rich McKay, who was the youngest son of John McKay, the first ever head coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, many people actually thought that after this season, Sam Wyche would be fired, but it did not happen. He had 1 more year potentially to prove what he could do as a head coach, and they were in the bottom half of the league in both offense and defensive scoring. However, their overall offensive yardage was middle of the pack. So while the scoring wasn't there, the yardage was there. They just needed to improve a little bit more in terms of their scoring offense. Now, their points for was 251. Their points against was 351 for a difference of negative 100. It's just, again, it's the same thing of they need to improve this scoring. They need to figure out how to score more points, probably specifically in the passing game. We can talk about that later, but the Craig Erickson show was still on the road, folks, and things seemed like they were getting better because they got a potential new franchise quarterback in Trent Dilfer. We'll talk about that in a minute. Fun fact, David Culley and Mike Mularkey were coaches on this team. David Culley is now the head coach of the Houston Texans, and Mike Mularkey, former head coach of the Tennessee Titans, I believe. So hey, congrats to both of those guys for being a part of Buccaneers history and then going off and doing things later in the NFL, specifically David Culley, who is right now the Houston Texans head coach. That is kind of cool. But they did lose some players. They lost Steve DeBerg, they lost Ray Seals, they lost Broderick Thomas, which that one breaks my heart into pieces. Joe King, Milton Mack, and Ricky Reynolds were all gone. Guys who were pretty impactful for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers the past few seasons, and even before the past few seasons. A lot of these guys were now gone, who were also solid contributors, specifically on defense. I mean, Steve DeBerg was gone. He was a backup quarterback at this point in his career, but they lost some very high-quality starting talent along that defensive side of the football. So how do they replace that? Well, let's dive into it a little bit. The draft included Trent Dilfer, who was the number 6 overall pick in this NFL draft. They also picked up Eric Rett, who in the second round, who was a running back, Pete Pearson in the 5th round, and then Jim Pine in the 7th round, who was actually a starting center for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for 3 years, which was kind of darn cool in my opinion. But in terms of getting guys to replace that talent that they lost on the defensive side of the football, at least in the draft, they didn't do much. Taking a look at some of the more notable players from this year in impactful stats, Craig Erickson, he started 15 games. He had 16 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. So hey, not bad. At least we finally have a positive touchdown to interception ratio. We haven't had that in the past, I think 7 to 8 years. So that's a solid thing. Eric Rett had 1,011 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. Great, cool. I mean, you wish the touchdowns wanted to be up a little bit, and you could also probably improve on the passing touchdowns, but it's awesome that the yardage is there, right? Lawrence Dawsey had 673 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown. He was the leading receiver in terms of yardage. Charles Wilson had 652 receiving yards and 6 receiving touchdowns, so it's nice to see, more touchdowns, being passed around. That's good. Brad Culpepper came into play with 4 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 1 fumble recovered on the defensive side of the football. Santana Dodson and Mark Wheeler had 3 sacks each, so that was a decline in play from the previous year. Eric Curry had 3 sacks and 2 forced fumbles. Again, a little bit more of a decline in play. Hardy Nickerson was still Hardy Nickerson, 122 tackles, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, and 2 interceptions. But again, slight decline of play from the previous season. Marty Mayhew, a cornerback, had 2 interceptions and 1 fumble recovered. And then John Lynch did not start a single game in 1994. That is just from my research, guys, okay? I looked it up on Pro Football Reference. I mean, at least according to them, he did not start a single game, which is mind-blowing to me, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But the offense maybe improved a little bit, but then the defense declined a little bit, so it really didn't balance out that well. It was just still more continuity of, this isn't going that well, but it seemed like things were getting better. Maybe. I mean, they were scoring a little bit more on offense, right? I mean, it wasn't too bad, Maybe things will get better in year number 4. And you know what? Things did get better in year number 4, okay? I will say that. They finished with a final record of 7-9. They were 5-2 through the first 7 games of the season. That is awesome. But you can obviously tell what happened. They were 5-2 through the first 7 games, and then they finished with a 7-9 record. That's not good. Malcolm Glazier was the new owner of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Sam Wyche needed a winning record to maintain his job in Tampa Bay. Now, there were still rumors of the team moving to Cleveland during the season, and Wyche would get into a sideline argument with starting quarterback Trent Dilfer, which caused many players to be upset with the head coach, and he was making some weird decisions towards the end of the year as well in terms of uniforms and stuff like that, so things were not going well in terms of gelling and cohesion and chemistry and, all those fun words. Sam Wyche, while the wins were up, everything else was kind of going down a little bit. Now, they had the near worst league passing offense in the entire NFL. They were nearly the worst passing offense in the entire league, while the rushing offense was actually middle of the pack. The passing defense was bottom half in the league, but the rushing defense was middle of the pack, which is kind of a story of really how this entire era went. We can talk about that in a little bit. The points for was 238. The points against was 335 for a difference of negative 97. Not the worst difference. We've seen many, many worse differences in just other eras in Buccaneers history. But again, the points for, it just wasn't enough. The Craig Erickson show, it was over, and the reins at quarterback were now tossed over to Trent Dilfer, who was the team's first-round quarterback from the previous season. He was taken with the number 6 overall pick. Craig Erickson would go on to basically be just a solid, reliable veteran in the NFL, by the way, so shout out to him for that. They did lose Craig Erickson. They lost Charles Wilson, who was a good receiver for them in the previous year. They lost Marty Carter and they lost Tony Covington, who were starting safeties for this team. Now, in terms of the draft, this was insane. They took Warren Sapp with the number 12 overall pick, and then they took Derek Brooks with the number 28 overall pick. So, like, yeah, things were going pretty good in terms of drafting players. You drafted 3 Hall of Famers in the Sam Wyche era, but you know, it might have just been too little too late. Some of the notable players and notable stats from year number 4, the Sam Wyche era, include Trent Dilfer, 4 passing touchdowns and 18 interceptions. Trent Dilfer started every single game this year, by the way. Every single game. 4 touchdowns, 18 interceptions. The Buccaneers would actually set a record this year for the least amount of passing touchdowns in an entire season in NFL history. I don't know if that record has been broken yet. I don't know if it'll ever be broken. If it has, hey, let me know. But Eric Rhett still did some good things. 1,207 rushing yards, 11 rushing touchdowns. So again, the running game was not bad. Jackie Harris, in addition from the Green Bay Packers, had 751 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown. Alvin Harper, in addition from the Dallas Cowboys, had 633 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. Horace Copeland had 605 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. On the defensive side of the football, Santana Dotson, he came back a little bit in terms of his play. 5 sacks, 2 fumbles recovered. Brad Culpepper was still consistent, still solid. He had 4 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovered. Warren Sapp had 3 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 1 interception, and 1 touchdown. So overall, you know, things were doing all right on the defensive side of the football. Sapp did some cool things in his rookie year. Hardy Nickerson was, you know, having an uptick in play. 143 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 3 fumbles recovered. Even John Lynch got in on it. Now, he only played in 9 games before going on the IR, but he did get 3 interceptions in those 9 games that he played in. That's not bad at all. John Lynch was starting to get into the groove of things. Martin Mayhew had 5 interceptions, 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovered, and 1 touchdown. And then Derek Brooks had 79 tackles, 1 sack, and 2 forced fumbles in his rookie season. So overall, there were pieces on that defensive side of the football for a continuity and a sustainable success. Now, while there was improvement with the record, you know, there were some strong players on that defense, and even the running game looked good, it was not enough. After the 4th year of the Sam Wyche era, he would be fired by Malcolm Glazier, who was the new owner of the team, and he would not be in the NFL again until 2004, when he joined the Buffalo Bills as their quarterbacks coach. Now, besides his time in Buffalo, he would coach at the high school level from 2002 to 2019, and unfortunately, Sam Wyche did pass away January 2nd of 2020 at the age of 74, which is sad. It's a gut punch to me, because when I think of the Sam Wyche era, they were so close, right? They were so close, I think, to being a playoff team. The pieces were there, in my opinion, for there to be success. On the defensive side of the football, not even including the fact that Sam Wyche and Rich McKay drafted 3 Hall of Famers in Warren Sapp, Derek Brooks, and John Lynch. They had talented guys on that defense. They really did. But the offensive side of the football, while the running game was great, they had a 1,000-yard rusher every single year. Eric Rhett and Reggie Cobb both did phenomenal. Besides that one year, in year number 2 when Reggie Cobb would get hurt, the passing game was the thing that could just never get going in this era. You look at Vinny Testaverde in his final year, he did Vinny Testaverde things. You look at Craig Erickson in years 2 and 3, in year number 2, he looked very Vinny Testaverde-like. In year number 3, yeah, he did better, but they needed a little bit more. And then Trent Dilfer in year number 4, forget about it, it was just not good. So, the passing game, the lack of scoring in the passing game, the lack of scoring on offense in general, I think that was the thing that Sam Wyche was missing from this formula, from his team being successful. It was just a lack of scoring on offense. I think that everything else was there. I even think the yardage was there in terms of passing yards and rushing yards. It was just a lack of scoring touchdowns. The special teams unit did not help at all. I mean, the best field goal percentage that they had during this time, I believe, was 73 to 75%. You can't win games like that point blank. So, not good special teams. A lack of a scoring offense was, in my opinion, missing from the Sam Wyche era. And for a guy who came from Cincinnati, who was supposed to have these high-scoring, innovative offenses, that is really disappointing. It's really upsetting to see, because I really do think Sam Wyche could have been a coach who could have changed the fortunes of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He just didn't have the quarterback that he needed. He didn't have the scoring offense that was there. And, eventually they would get some coaches who came in, Tony Dungy, John Gruden, who would, add the final pieces to that puzzle and eventually get them to the playoffs consistently and eventually win them a Super Bowl. But don't forget Sam Wyche. John Lynch, Derek Brooks, and Warren Sapp wouldn't be here if Sam Wyche and Rich McKay didn't make those decisions to draft those guys. And overall, there were a lot of positives to take away on the defensive side of the football and in the running game. It just was barely not enough, in my opinion. I really do think Sam Wyche was really close to being a consistently good head coach for this team. He was just missing a scoring offense and a passing game, missing a quarterback, really, a good quarterback at that, and that really does suck to see. Jeez, the Sam Wyche era was sad. They were so close. They were seriously right there. Just a couple of more things needed to go their way, and they could have been a playoff team basically for the past 3 years of the Sam Wyche era. That really does suck.
Hello, James. How are you enjoying your foray into the terrible history of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Have you finally grown to hate this team yet?
I mean, I'm not feeling good that we're this far along into our journey, but joke's on you, because Tony Dungy and John Gruden were after the Sam Wyche era, and they did great. The Buccaneers made it to the playoffs multiple times, and they even won a Super Bowl. So take that, man. Take that. Tony Dungy and John Gruden saved the day. So what do you have for me now?
You were quick to forget, James. After Tony Dungy and John Gruden, there was a period of darkness known as the post-John Gruden era. Many coaches came and many coaches fell, and you will be looking at every single one.
Oh, no. I'm not looking at the post-John Gruden era. I'm not doing it, man. I'm not doing it. That is a dark timeline that I do not want to go down.
You are a fool, James. You will continue to review every single aspect of the terrible history of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the post-John Gruden era included. You will know true pain, and you will come to hate the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I will see you soon with the next era for you to review. Until that time, farewell.
Oh no, this isn't gonna be good. Oh gosh.